Greetings, bloggers, vloggers, followers, and potters. Dustin here from Dustin's Dynasty, here at you again with another edition of this week's vlog. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Dustin. I'm a middle-aged man that has been living his life on the autism spectrum in one way or another since about 18 months being diagnosed. I've been living on my own for over 8 years now. It's amazing to say that. 6 years in the current situation, um, almost 6 years. And I've had a part-time job for over 16 years. And what I do every week on this podcast is I share a glimpse of my life on the autism spectrum and how we sometimes cope with life, maybe something I've experienced, maybe some hint I can give. But, that's one thing or another. I encourage you to follow my socials. I'm on Linktree, as always. That's the best way to go, where you can find all my socials. But as far as today's vlog, let's go ahead and dive into the meat and bones of the presentation. Today, let's talk about, a complete turnaround. And, I think if anybody's followed me, probably the last hundred and so vlogs, at least in the last 3 years, you've known that life hasn't been easy. Life has been challenging. I almost hit rock bottom. And even though there's been so many changes in the past 3 years, and there's more changes coming down the pike, I think more and more we realize to ourselves, how even moments that used to be so stressful or still can be stressful have a complete way of turning themselves around and becoming better for me, and my management of them become better in the end. We all know with autism, change isn't easy. And believe me, when the first change happened over 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I should say, it wasn't easy. I wanted to avoid it. And that's how, most things are. I know of a podcaster, or not a podcaster, but somebody on one of the content platforms referring to it as anxiety avoidant. And that's, I guess, what many of the things that one of the big things I do when I start to feel uncomfortable about something, when something may go to the next step, or somebody may ask the question that may go to the next step. Um, you know, uh, what how, I want to run away from it. I want to push others away when things don't feel comfortable, or they're uncertain, or they're dangerous, or I feel there's an impending sense of doom. I want to push myself away from just taking that step and doing something, even if it is something that in all honesty is harmless to me, and can really make a difference, and can make my life better. Even if I don't see it that way, I'm gonna make it an avoiding. I'm gonna try to avoid it. And I think often I avoid things. I think anxiety is often the coexistent, in things. And sometimes we have to always, even though anxiety is something that holds us back, sometimes we have to see things in the eyes of others to come around full circle, and not let ourselves be continue to be brought down by something we perceive or we feel, or that we don't give things a chance to work out and see that they do better, and people do overcome their fears, and things that we perceive that aren't as bad as we think they're going to be could be, that they improve, they get better, we get along, things are much more manageable than what they were in the past. And I think, this past week has been more and more of seeing that, seeing how hurtful the past was, what was really bringing me down, and then combine that with not taking care of my mental health and spiraling out of control not once but twice, and overall over the past 2 years been really having more insight on caring for my mental health and knowing what I need to do to have the best outcomes possible in life and have the best quality of life. Those things have helped made me understand them better, how to cope with things better, learning how to navigate life and its challenges and deal with things. And even as things change and are not perfect and are not certain, and there can be anxiety, it's learning how to deal best with it and knowing sometimes, there is a plan and there is a way of things working. And sometimes it takes developing your own plan to be able to calm yourself, to regulate yourself, to get through those hard moments. But seeing, overall that you've overcame what used to be so hard for you and what you used to be so, as myself, being so attached to and obsessing and thinking, it it goes away because you can see that it things are better when you start to let go of it. When you start to let go of harboring the feelings, the hurt, the hate that you have for someone or something because you believe this, that, or the other thing. And because you've been so stuck in this, that, or the other thing, you're unwilling to see how maybe it was on the other person, or maybe how your anxiety led things to be the way they were. But in honesty, it takes sometimes trusting others too, and knowing that they got your back and they're there to support you. Granted, I know not everybody has that luxury, and sometimes people don't have everything. But I think for me, I had to see that, I had to put trust in others, whether that's a friendship, whether that's, a professional relationship, whether it's the professionals, whether it's coworkers, whether, it's family. I have to continue to hold that trust in them just as much as they hold the trust in me, as I have improved greatly, in the past few years. I will admit that change wasn't easy. There was times I wanted to avoid things because, again, that anxiety avoidant would kick in, and I'd want to avoid things just because they were hard and they made me want to think about everything but what I had to do, and thinking that I couldn't do the things that needed to be done, that I wasn't capable, that I couldn't push through and be strong and be brave and do those things. It can, those things were able to be done. I did get mentally more capable, more understanding, and was able and continuing to be able to rebuild the trust of what I had and understand, that what I have to do is important to take care of my mental health, why things have to be the way they are, and working at ways to combat the things I don't like, that I didn't like in the past, and why I didn't do this, that, or the other thing. It takes sometimes acting with a sense of logic and understanding and knowing what's real versus what's not, having a navigational sense of capability, learning how to take things in stride. Those things all matter, in navigating the day, especially, maybe when it seems a little hard and frustrating. Maybe, maybe it's just one of those days where it's not easy, not only for you, but others too. And sometimes, I think for me at least, I think of the other people as surrounding me and how, I don't want to ruin their day. I don't want to make their day harder. I don't want to make their day more challenging. So instead of thinking, you know, why does it have to be about me, or why do I have to pitch a tantrum or a mantrum or whatever to show that I'm disappointed or that things aren't going my way, when really it's not that bad of a thing, and really I can cope and I can do better in my ways. But ultimately it comes down to showing myself and proving to myself, those around me, and anybody else who is in my path of knowledge, to understand that, I overcame this struggle. I can do this. I can be brave. I can know how to cope in challenging situations. I can fight the fight that is hard to fight and do what I need to do and be strong in that path and understand, how to get through things that may be a little unpleasant, may be a little hard to deal with, may have some uncertainty, may drive some fear, may drive some anxiety, and not let go of the comfort feeling that I have and put the trust in others just as much as they have put the trust in me. And understanding that they're there looking for me and they know it's for me, and that they're not going to leave me hanging, and they're not going to leave me, just make worse of me. If you build the right energy and you put the right investment into the right people, and sometimes it is being willing to be strong and build those boundaries, and know what you're going to accept in life, know what you're not going to accept in life. I think that was where it all started about almost 5 years ago, was saying, I don't want this in my life, I don't want that. And I think the same thing can be said, what's healthy for us to digest, maybe on social media, maybe in the outside world, maybe learning something that is not worth the energy to fight for, and understanding what is and what matters to you. What makes it better. What can I do to turn this situation around? And I think overall, most of those lessons in the past, from at least 5 to years ago to now, that has helped me in a greater sense understand where I need to be, and that it's not about fighting a fight. It's not about getting what I want. It's about being able to thrive in this world, being the best person I can be, and continuing to be that example, continuing to be that shining light in those in others that I know I can be. And it's always, it always tugs at my heart to know there are people watching, people who can, who know I can be a good person. And I show them the way of life, and that life, despite the struggles that they may be having at that very moment, are just temporary in nature, and it does get better. People do recover. It's possible, it's probable, it's likely. I often think of 5 years ago, over 5 years ago, of a day where that same culture was a complete opposite of what it is today, and how it spiraled me out of control and target, somebody, and see somebody in a light that didn't need to be seen, but then not realizing one of my peers was in the same room, and how that they saw me in this person they never seen me, and how it can be scary, and how it can be, people are fearful and concerned, and knowing that, in the end, it's not that I want to throw every opportunity that I have away by maybe going to an acute psychiatric unit or being in the legal system. It's knowing, I'm doing what I can, taking care of my mental health, taking care of myself, being my best, and understanding also the expectations of what's expected, knowing there's consequences that can be detrimental, that can set things back when I don't do what's right, and understand that even, as much as, things like medication help, it's ultimately up to me to make the right decisions, do the right things, to be able to cope through things, even if they are better and they bring their own set of challenges or their own set of anxiety. It is no way in what it was, 2, 3 years ago, or those feelings aren't there, because it takes sitting down and having those conversations and talking those things out, talking the way, the hurt that I felt, the feelings that I felt, letting go of that, knowing that those things don't exist anymore, and that, seeing things for what they really were, and starting to understand how I was, and that, I can't go back to that way, and I have to learn to not only move on, but see things in a better life, have a positive mindset, be willing to extend myself just a little more out of my comfort zone each and every time. And, within those 3 past years, I've done great things. And there's just too many to list, I think today, but it's ultimately the ultimate complete turnaround of where we were maybe 3 years ago. And we're not all quite on that 3 year mark of where I relapsed, but knowing that we're making way better decisions, we're being logical, we're being responsible, and we've done a lot of work to invest in my mental health and to understand things even before relapses, but even after. And we're still learning every day. It is never too late to learn. You can always learn. You can always grow. You can always learn something if your mind is willing to understand it, accept it, learn how to, apply it to life, those sort of things. It's not always easy to deal with things that are unpleasant or that drive anxiety, drive fear in yourself. But it's also the joy of overcoming what was hard for you and from a time when you wanted to avoid it, and seeing that you've overcame that struggle. And even though it's later on, you've learned how to be better at it, dealing with it, managing the anxiety, coping in the best way you can, and living life as the person you deserve to be. So I want to thank you for listening this week. If you haven't already, be sure to like this video, tap that notification bell. We do a vlog post usually every week. Subscribe to my channel or anywhere you're following. Be sure to follow me to look up me up on the internet, www.dustinsdynastyusa.com. And finally, the last thing I want to say is, the link tree is always available, of course, it's Dustin's Dynasty under the backslash. And reminder this weekend, you are loved, you matter, you are enough. Have a good weekend. Today is National Relaxation Day. Do something for you, relax, enjoy life a little bit, and we'll talk at you soon. Bye for now.